Hello and welcome to another Atypical Philosopher video with myself, Jonathan MSP. It's really good to have you here with me. I'm going to walk you through the front lines today, but just to let you know, not a lot of territory has swapped hands, but that's pretty much part of the course at the moment. But quite a bit to talk about in terms of strategy and tactics and overall ramifications of what's happening where and what people's intentions might be. So let's just first talk about Belarus. Belarus have been shipping a bunch of their armaments down to the front lines in Donetsk region, but obviously they have to do a dogleg round here now because of the lines being cut around the northern Luhansk area. So if Ukraine can hit this Starobilsk railway line, then it takes out that. So I presume the Russians, that is, are moving armaments down through this railway line to Luhansk, the city, and then moving them westwards there. So that's the importance of Starobilsk and should be a big objective for the Ukrainians. So the Belarusians, they have like 60,000 troops basically, and it is a bit of a worry that they are sort of committing more openly to supporting Russia. Now, this could be a real thorn in the side of the Ukrainians. If they had suddenly 60,000 troops and a bunch of munition, even if they aren't the greatest troops and even if the armaments and equipment isn't the best in the world, this will cause the Ukrainians to have to divert resources up to the northern area, and that will be challenging for them. So, you know, the Belarusians could present a problem for the Ukrainians. However, it looks more like that the setup is a lend-lease setup, and they are just basically allowing Russia to completely strip their warehouses clean of any equipment, send it off to their own forces on the front line, and Lukashenko, who's a Belarusian leader, can just say, "Hey, my troops aren't getting involved. I'm not stepping over this particular red line, so I won't get hit internationally as much as I might do." So trying to play it maybe a little bit carefully by supporting Russia as much as you can, whilst also saying, I'm not going to send my troops across the border to die. So anyway, that's my thoughts. So obviously there's still shelling being swapped on both sides along the northern border. That's something that always goes on. And in the nighttime, you know, Russia has still been hitting targets in and around Ukraine. Particularly, I think Nikopol is somewhere. We'll talk about that in a little bit when we get there. Anyway, so let's go to the Oskil River, Kupiansk to Svatove to Kreminna in this Luhansk Oblast, this Luhansk region of Ukraine in the northeast, and see what is going on there. And I want to talk to you about what Russia's intentions actually are. So here we have the region. We've got Kupiansk coming down to Svatove and Kreminna. Russians still occupy Svatove and Kreminna. Kupiansk is in the Ukrainians' hands and has been liberated. And they're trying to push further east from Kupiansk and northeast. It is still under shelling, Kupiansk, from Russian artillery. There is a little bit of movement on that front line up in that northern area, which is here. So I think Vilshana is under a lot of pressure from the Ukrainians. And Trevnivi, these two settlements, and even Kislivka, again, there are claims that they're fighting in all those areas. So it looks like the Ukrainians are trying to push further out here. But we have this front line that goes broadly down here. Svatove is on this road and railway line going north-south and joins up to Kupiansk, and the Ukraine has obviously broken that road and logistics between the two. Not that, you know, the Russians own Kupiansk or occupy Kupiansk anymore. So we have this line that goes down north to south, and then we'll join it as it comes down further. This line here is the Kherson River, okay? And there are a bunch of towns along the Kherson River, from Rydorodka to Kozlivka and Novodyane. Those are in Russian hands at the moment. In fact, that's pretty much where the front line is. And then you've got Makivka and Nevsky. These are occupied by or liberated. These have been liberated by the Ukrainians. although there are claims at the moment that they are under a bit of pressure from the Russians. And then we have these towns down here. So you've got Terny, Zaporizhzhia, Torsky, and Dobrova. Now, this area yesterday was what I was talking about a lot in my video, because there have been claims that the Russians had done a counteroffensive and taken these towns. And then I talked yesterday about how pro-Ukraine is saying, no, that's just lies. And then the Russians walked back at least some of their claims. And now they're making those claims again. So the reality might be somewhere in the middle. This could be just a grey zone here, so the Russians claim that. So this is to zoom in here. Here is Kreminna, Rubizhny, the P66 highway, and Dobrova could well be a bit of a grey area. And Torsky, the Russians had walked back that and claimed that actually they're not in there. But Yampolivka and Terny and some smaller settlements just to the north of there, they claim that they've done a successful counterattack on. Now, on the other hand, you've got the Ukrainians saying, no, that's not so true. They're just under heavy artillery fire and Grad and Smerch sort of rocket fire, which they are. There's drone footage to confirm that. So the question is, who is controlling these towns? And the reality is probably that no one is, really. The towns are probably not particularly full of civilians, and this is contested. There's a lot of grey area going on here, and it's a waiting game to see what the Ukrainians are actually going to do when their amassed forces kick into action. The question is, what are the Russian intentions? You've got a river coming down here, the Krasna River, and you've got the P66 highway, and you've also got another river, the Zherebets River here, going north to south, both going north to south. And the question for the Russians is, what line do they want? Ideally, they want this line as further west as possible to give them a buffer zone and the ability to use this P66 highway to supply their own troops along that line, but also to run supplies from Svatove to Kreminna. And then you've got a secondary line here as a kind of something to fall back on. It's worth having a look at the topography here. So, I often show you maps like this, but it doesn't really tell you much about what's going on. And even the Google maps here of the terrain tells you only, whether it's fields or trees. Well, a topographical map might be pretty useful to look at here to give you a sense of what's going on. Now, these are not transliterated into English, the names, but here is Svatove, here's Krasnoyarsk, which is the area that I said that the Ukrainians had a bit of a foothold in. I'm not so sure they do so much at the moment. Then going down south to Kreminna, Rubizhny, Severodonetsk, and Lysychansk, if my grasp on language is correct. So that's the Krasna River. And then you have the Zherebets River coming up here. And at the moment, the Russians hold this line about halfway down, and then it sort of flips over towards the Krasna River, and it's somewhere in between. At least that's what I've been saying. But the Russians are now saying, really, they either occupy these towns or these are just properly contested. The question is, looking at this terrain, what's useful for the Russians? Even if they do fall back on this defensive line from Svatove to Kreminna, which side of the river do they want to be on? Are they going to give up the P66 highway? And, if the Ukrainians have the high ground here, then they've got an advantage with their artillery. And then you've got the artillery on the other side of this kind of small valley, or not, it's not like a particularly steep valley. But where would the Russians want to have their defensive line? Going out further here, you can see the topography of the whole region. These aren't huge sort of mountainous areas, but it is useful to consider when trying to work out what the best defensive line to take is from Svatove down to Kreminna, or do they go, as I say, west of that? So this operational pause that the Ukrainians have done has enabled the Russians to dig in, and this has been the criticism against the Ukrainians, is that they didn't successfully continue their momentum. They did an operational pause for whatever reason, but it has allowed the Russians to build up defensive lines. And what this has done is it allowed them to do things like this. This is very reminiscent of World War One, World War Two, Maginot Line, building these defenses. So here's an example. This is about 20 kilometers south of Lysychansk, but it's just an example of the sort of thing that they're doing, and well worth dwelling on for a little bit. So here you've got two rows of, each row has two rows of dragon teeth, these sort of concrete bollards that disallow moving vehicles, tracked vehicles or APCs, wheeled vehicles to get by without doing something first. And then after two lines of dragon teeth, they have a first line of trenching. And then behind that, they've got a second line of zigzag trenching, and they have entrenched vehicles as well, which is all pretty common to entrench your vehicles to protect them from artillery fire. However, this is some serious work that's gone into this. Well, not just that. Let's show you a bit of a close up. You've got these two lines of dragon teeth. You've got the first line of trenching and a portable trenching machine working to do that. Now, let's have a look at this video. This video is fascinating and gives you an insight into how much effort has gone into these, and then makes you wonder how successful this would be against, precision artillery barrages, grad barrages, or, full-on assaults. I don't know. We shall see, but it's got to be worth something. And here you have the trenches, a big old trench line, dragon teeth there, and trenches, and multiple trenches of dragon teeth. This sort of thing, the Russians are putting in place, and that's certainly going to be more challenging for the Ukrainians to overcome. And that's partially a result of the Ukrainians giving the Russians time to do this. Now, it might have been that they had no other choice. They had to take an operational pause. They didn't have the troops. They didn't have logistics. They didn't have the wherewithal or whatever to continue that lightning offensive. Whatever the reasons are, the Russians have been able to take advantage of it. And there's lots of discussion, about how they're doing this and why they're doing it. And what the ramifications will be. We obviously know why it's for defensive reasons. So anyway, that's for me interesting. Of course, what's going on here is open to debate. My idea is probably somewhere in the middle, that you just have these grey zones where the towns are just, someone might say they occupy it, the other side might say they're just hammering it with artillery. And in fact, if you occupy that, what does that really mean? When it's being hammered by artillery, there aren't people living there probably, because it's right in the middle of a war zone. So there you go. Let's continue to take a look around the front lines. So as we go south from there, we go to Bakhmut. Bakhmut is still under a lot of pressure. It looks like it's becoming encircled, particularly to the north. There's a little salient to the north, and they're continuing to encircle it a little bit to the south, and there is fighting in the suburbs. Bakhmut, somebody said yesterday, it's pretty well defended within Bakhmut. The thing about a town like Bakhmut is that even if you've got it pretty well defended, and this is the map I had from yesterday, so let's bring that up to give it a little looky-see. This is Bakhmut's map here, and this is the front line, and the Russians are moving to the south. They want to encircle it, cut off this road, and circle it to north and cut off this road. This won't be like Mariupol, where you've got the Avastal steelworks that are 6 floors down, and you can pack them with the resources and provisions and last out for weeks. If the Russians want to flatten this, they ostensibly can, and they seem to be trying to do so. If this was encircled, the people here wouldn't last very long, and so they can be pretty well defended in there. But then it's not like Mariupol. So my opinion is that the Ukrainians are trying to make this as painful for the Russians as possible, but it will eventually fall. Unless things change, unless, I say will fall, but things could well change. Okay, so further down south, Avdivka is a place north of Donetsk, which is looking like the Russians want to encircle that, and they're pushing out from Donetsk as well. But is a matter of meters per day. Not a lot of change on the Zaporizhzhia front line at all. They're at the Tokmak, which is a Russian-occupied town. Apparently, the Ukrainians hit 3 S-300s last night, and these are the surface-to-air missile systems that the Russians have been using to actually attack ground targets. For example, Nikopol, which is a very important economic place for Ukraine because it's where they process their manganese ore, which is used in quality steel making. So that'll be exported to places like USA, Germany, Japan, and other places. I think Italy as well, Turkey. So this, by hitting that in nighttime cruise missile or S-300 hits, the Russians are again attempting to cripple the Ukrainian economy, which is really struggling at the moment because there are electricity rationing. They're unable to sell electricity abroad because they need that themselves. About a third of the infrastructure or a third of the capacity has been hit in Ukraine, and to lose that almost overnight is a massive thing. So they're rationing electricity on a personal basis, but also they've got to consider their own industries and their inability to sell their electricity abroad. There's been talk. There's a nuclear power station here, Nohodar, that apparently the Ukrainians, according to the Russians, attacked a couple of times over a couple of months ago. Did some boat raids on there, and then the Russians showed evidence of that as a concrete barge. It's like, no. Anyway, so it could well have just been outright lies, probably was, but I think there is some photographic evidence to suggest there are some boats being moved down through Zaporizhzhia, and maybe this is showing that there could be some eventual attacks, amphibious attacks, coming in the next whenever. The Russians have been worrying for a long time that there are forces amassing here to strike for Melitopol, but also forces amassing here to strike for Mariupol. And now we're hearing forces are up here amassing for another offensive, and forces around Kherson. Maybe the Russians are just either paranoid or trying to spread misinformation or disinformation or whatever, or there are genuinely forces amassing in all of those places. Kherson, what's been going on there? Well, again, not a lot in terms of swapping territory or gaining territory or losing territory. There have been static front lines. When I give a front line like this, so this is a northern Kherson going from Milove across here, what this actually represents, as I keep saying, it's not a single line where people are standing each side touching swords. This is a front line that will take into account a grey area, a grey zone, where there will be contested area north and south of that line. So, for example, Deep State, so my line goes to Milove, and apparently there are sort of clashes around Milove, but Deep State's line, which is a Ukrainian mapping sort of service, they see the Russians controlling to the north of there. There are 6 places here. These are visually confirmed to have been definitely liberated. So 100%, so we go back to that's nova-kahovka and north of there. A bunch of towns, so nova-kahovka, Novohrivka, Chivony, Petropavlivka, and Trivanivka. So these are liberated for sure. But there's probably some grey zone along this line. But it seems that is pretty much the Kherson northern front line, and everywhere else has remained pretty static, as that has too. There is some big news. First of all, this is the UK intelligence update. In recent days, the Russian occupation authorities have likely ordered preparation for the evacuation of some civilians from Kherson. It is likely that they anticipate combat extending to the city of Kherson itself. So that's really big news, to the fact that if they're moving people out of Kherson, then they are thinking, oh, what's going on here? Something else to note is that the Russians have had pontoon bridges active across the Inhulets River. The Inhulets River is this river that joins the Dnipro, that cuts north to south here, but then sort of goes northeast and has provided, over time, broadly the front line. But now it's slightly different. But this Inhulets River the Ukrainians had disabled bridges and pontoon bridges across that river that has meant that the like the western sections of the Russian occupied forces are unable to link up so successfully with the eastern sections and therefore supply each other, and so on and so forth. Well, it turns out there's now some imagery to show that there have been active pontoon bridges that have been up for at least a few days, and in fact evidence is to suggest that the Nova-Kahovka dam has been able to be used to some extent for resupplying. And so, again, the Ukrainians will be onto this. They'll be trying to hit these again and again, as has been a continual thing, and the pontoon bridges and ferries on the Dnipro River. But that's to suggest that probably these forces have had some small amount of resupply, possibly. What else is very has been all over the news in the last couple of days is that the Ukrainian Air Force has shot down 4 helicopters in 18 minutes, or that was their claim, but it seems pretty bona fide. Their claims pretty much usually come true. And from 8:40 to 8:58 yesterday morning in the south of Ukraine, an anti-aircraft missile unit of the Air Force destroyed at least 4 attack helicopters of the enemy, presumably Ka-52s, and that were providing fire support to the occupying troops on the ground. And apparently there were 2 others that were engaged as well, so it could have been more than 4. And one of the helicopters fell into the occupied areas of the Ukrainians, and 3 of them fell in the occupied areas of the Russians. So that was all over the internet because that was a huge morale boost for the Russians, for the Ukrainians, sorry. And their Air Force Command then said later in the day that 5 Ka-52s were destroyed. That I don't know if that 5th one might have been there, it could have been somewhere else. 17 Shahed 136 kamikaze drones were taken down, and 2 drones, Zala Lancet drones, were also taken down. So they had a pretty busy day yesterday in the air. That is, so that's that. And really, we shall see, whether those amassed troops in the Kherson area make a strike today or over the next couple of days, because things are not moving particularly quickly. Okay, that's my synopsis of the front lines. Hopefully that was useful for you. I am doing at the moment a collaboration with UA Supporter, which also runs the YouTube channel Reporting from Ukraine. So a lot of you will watch that. It's a pro-Ukrainian YouTube channel. If you want to support them and their sort of use of Ukrainian businesses and people to help, help get things moving there, then you can buy merchandise from them. And if you buy it from uasupporter.com/ATP, Atippling Philosophy. If you put ATP after that /, you'll be sent to here, and you'll be able to buy stuff and get free delivery on it, and support them, but also support my own channel with a little bit of commission. So if that's your bag, please look to support them. Obviously, I've got my own ways of supporting me as well down in the description. If you have the financial capability and wherewithal to do that, obviously it's hugely appreciated. Buy me a coffee or whatever. It allows me to do this. Otherwise, I wouldn't be doing this. So thank you to all those who do support me in those ways. Really kind, supporting, generous messages and support in that way has been, truly appreciated. Otherwise, just like, share, subscribe, and just be here. Thank you for having a really active and very useful comments thread. I mean, so much knowledge is being thrown onto that comments thread below. And often I had to correct some of the claims I make. So please hold me to account. It's really appreciated. So anyway, thank you. I'll get out an update video later today. But in the meantime, toodle pips. I'll see you later.